All right, so I have pretty much onboarded to a new job about 6 months ago in March, and now it is in October. Maybe by the time this video comes out, it's November, but I wanted to talk about tips on how to learn or start a new job because I haven't started a new job in 3-4 years. Basically, my first job was my entry-level job, and the way it's different, and they are both very different. If you do entry level, they know you're entry level, okay? So because of that, they're naturally gonna have like training programs or even like onboarding programs that they fly you out to, which I did for a technology development program. But when it comes to being an experienced hire, it's a little bit different because you're coming in to either fill up shoes that have already been existed or to particularly solve a problem or implement something that they knew you were good for. My manager actually told me that he hired me because I came from a consulting background. So we wanted to go from the reactive way to proactive way. So in some cases before, it's more of like a support in some ways, or like basically a very glamorized support, but we're going into a consultative approach. So that's exactly why he approached me, because of the fact that I had consulting background, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about like what you can do to really get acclimated quickly. But to be honest, like my very big tip here, which honestly could save so much time, is onboarding in an office. And I know everyone's gonna be like, oh, I wanna work remotely, or why do I have to go to the office? Like we come to a new age, but I've learned so much faster in an office setting than actually being remote. Because when you think about it, think about like how it's like to be in a virtual internship or virtual job. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know who to navigate with, or like the drama, the dynamics of everything. The only way to see it is like in person, and you kind of see all the nonverbal cues, or maybe when you go in and you kind of have a feeling of the culture, because virtually it's hard to feel that way. When it comes to being in person, you can also easily become friends with people. I've been in companies where I did go in office a lot, and one of the things that I realized was that it's harder for me to make friends with them that way, but it was easier for me to make friends here because we were always texting each other going like, hey, are you coming to the office today? And because of that, like we would actually save a table, or we would go eat breakfast together, or go get matcha, or go to some event, or make sure we meet up in a conference room, that kind of thing. There's so many different things. We also even talk about other things that are not business related or work related. Honestly, there's like a lot of things we talk about, which could be a good and a bad thing because it depends on how much you want to separate from work. But personally for me, I think it's a good healthy balance where we talk about work and personal, but not too much where it becomes consuming or very blurring the lines of like what is acceptable. But one thing I wanted to talk about is first the one-on-ones. Like I think everyone talks about them, and when you do it virtually, it's harder to do because you could just kind of have a feeling of like who's on the team based off of like what your manager's saying, or if you have an organization chart anywhere, you just reach out to them, set up a call. But the best one-on-ones I've had were going into the office and having lunch with them. And my team is actually pretty global, so we have some in LATAM. And LATAM means for Latin America, for those who don't know. And then we also have in AMER. So this usually means that we're across the country. So we have people in like San Francisco, Mountain View, Seattle, Chicago, Atlanta. We're kind of spread apart. So sometimes one-on-ones are not possible, but doing it like in person can actually be really good too, because what could be like a 15-minute coffee break and then you just run off to your next, you're not running off. You're just gonna click to your next calendar invite. It's like a clear cut. Meanwhile, if you were to do it in an office setting, you can kind of, I mean, it's a good and a bad thing, but you can kind of lose track of time and really get a vibe of someone and have a feeling of like what you can do. So things like being spontaneous and go for a coffee or going for lunch, you can do in the office, or even just like catching up when you're sitting by their desk. So that's what I thought was really cool. One-on-ones have been really great to see for me specifically on what is everyone working on. So specifically client work, it's really nice to know like what kind of client work they're working on. How did they get to where they are? The kind of questions I had were both personal and professional. I first asked like, what was their journey leading up to this? And this is a really good way on telling you like the exact trajectory people can take with this team, because this is where I found out that people have jumped in within different roles at Google. So I found out like, okay, well, it means that it is pretty easy for you to transfer around or jump around based off of what I'm seeing. Like I literally have proof of concept that people have done this, as opposed to being in a company where they say it's easy for you to move around, but they don't. So usually just having a sense of like their career journey, but also having a sense of their background. Because like I said before, when it comes to being a consultant, And you can actually be like many different things. You could be a different background. You can have consulting background. Maybe you have product knowledge area. So in my area, it's like Google Shopping. So maybe you have retail experience. Maybe you have advertising experience for the Google Shopping ad area of it. Maybe you have consulting experience. Maybe you have tech consulting experience, which is where I came from. But I also had retail experience and some advertising experience. So kind of blended in properly there. But you always want to know how that works out, because you have a sense of like maybe who to reach out to next time. Let's say you find someone who's more on the technical side, like someone who came from the engineer side, or they transferred from being like an analytical lead. Then you know an idea that like next time you have something similar of an ask or question, you can ask that person, say like, hey, are you familiar with like who I can talk to get access to this tool? Or do you know what I can do to remove this blocker? That kind of thing. So I have my go-to people when it comes to something like that based off of the areas I found out from the one-on-ones. And sometimes it could be something as like Google Shopping is a huge umbrella, but what if one has like access to third party, or one access is more on like data quality, or one is more on vehicle listing ads. Like different areas means that if you have a question in those areas, you know who to talk to. So it's not just having one-on-ones to just meet them in person, but to know exactly like a point person to go to, instead of just being aimless and just like asking a random group chat, like, hey, anyone knows this? Like I would know at least if someone says like, oh, I work on this as mine of OKR. And for those who don't know, an OKR is essentially an objective and key result. So it's something that the team or a business unit has said that this is an important OKR and that what that person's focusing on. So now you know if you say like this person's OKR is well-being, anytime you have anything regarding well-being, you could reach out to this person. Or maybe this other person has this internal initiative going on with this particular product. If you have a question about that product, is the person to talk to. So not to mention, I always like to set touch-based sessions with a buddy or a mentor or a teacher of some sort. Thankfully, when it came to Google, I already got assigned one. And it actually ended up being one of the interviewers that I have. So we originally had it like twice a week, and these times were just mostly like any questions I had while I was going through training. If I had questions about something, or if I wanted to have a practical example of something so I can materialize what that meant. Because at the end of the day, like even though we are experienced hires, we still have training, but we have to onboard really quickly because they're expecting us to be able to work really quickly. That's the whole purpose of like going for a consultant, is like you learn quickly, so you want to adapt quickly. So naturally, like that's what I had to do. But having these touch-based sessions is really good, because a lot of times you might be like asking all these people things, but having a touch base means you can kind of think about everything that just happened the past week. What can I do to just like push this down and see, okay, what can I do? Because now you can have all your questions concentrate in one area. You can have conversations that build off of it. They can kind of have a sense of like the trend of like, oh, I noticed you kind of have questions here. Maybe talk to this person, or check this program, or check this training. And it's a good way to do this because now you have a mentor to rely on to ask. Well, I wouldn't say like ask all your dumb questions. In the beginning, you should ask all your dumb questions. But usually when you first start out, you want to make sure you ask smart questions. So in some ways, it's like, hey, I've noticed like this, X, Y, and Z. I have a question on this. Could you give me some insights on about it? So the way I said it was like I did my homework before I just straight up asked, what is X? So it's a good way to kind of rephrase your way, because you want to show that you're not wasting your time, that you're trying to do your legwork as well. Sometimes it also means like maybe you're a client, or maybe you have a problem and you're trying to figure out what exactly is the issue. You have to show that you've done your work. And that actually goes into the kind of questions you ask. Technically, you could ask all your dumb questions, but I would make sure that you have that relationship set first. I know everyone says there's no such thing as a bad question. There's such thing as a good and a better question, okay? So personally for me, I always try to aim for a better question. A good question still means that like you're trying to figure out something out, but you want to make sure though that like you're still asking those basic questions, because if you make an assumption off a basic question and then you start going to a client, or you start going to a coworker or a colleague or a teammate about this, and then you kind of give them the wrong idea of it because you're trying not to ask the dumb questions, that's gonna hurt you. So you want to be able to first ask it in a way where it shows you've done your homework. Like say like, hey, I've noticed on this documentation that this means this. Can you give me an example of that? Or like, does this mean, and then you kind of explain it in your own way, like paraphrase it. They may go like, yeah, that's exactly it. Or they might be like, yes and no, which is what I constantly get in my role, was that they say like, yes, that is right in these circumstances of this. And that was a good thing to know, because now I know not everything is like basically black and white. Like there's some gray area to it, and some ideas to know that to look for that gray area too. So you want to learn, research, and basically do everything you can. Like either going to the trainings that are accessible. I've always gone this all the time where I hated this. Everyone says, oh my God, my company has no training. And I'm like, are you even aware of the resources that you have? There is training, you're just not looking for it. And I know there's also some systematic issues too, that like maybe they don't make it known enough, but for the most part, a lot of people don't think about it. They kind of expect someone to just go to you and say like, hey, go to this training, which is not how it works. Because a lot of times when it comes to consulting roles and even tech companies, you kind of have to look for it. They're not going to give you a training program so you can onboard properly to this job or program. You're going to have to probably look at first, like they always tell you like where you can go for training. When it comes to Accenture, it's My Learning. When it comes to Google, it's Go/Grow. So those two resources, look and scour through them. Find those trainings that you may not know of, because I know people who have started who are like, I didn't even know we had this. I'm like, yeah, because I looked at XYZ resource. And then I see the comments in my videos go like, they don't provide any training. I'm like, yes, they do. You're just not looking for it. So it's like things like that kind of irk me, because there is training. Unless you go to a company that literally has no training, but I always double check and ask that first in the interview, because the first thing I want is like an environment where they encourage you to learn and grow. And usually training is the where it is. So if you know for sure there's training and then you come in and you realize there's no training, it's most likely because you did not do the research and find where that is, or you did not remember where it was. Just go back to your notes, go back to your emails. And the other thing I wanted to do is like, first you want to learn who you're working with. And this is really important when it comes to being in a company of any kind that's not consulting firm, because I think in a consulting firm it changes all the time. You can have to relearn all the time. In a tech company specifically, when it comes to being here, you can kind of understand like who are your internal stakeholders. And when I'm talking about that, it could be that who should be on your good side, who should you keep close touch, so that way like if they do their job well, you will do your job well. If their job is not doing that well, you may also get pulled in there. Your work-life balance basically gets thrown out of balance. So you want to make sure you do that research of like figuring out who are you working with directly. This could happen by just shadowing people and literally asking, who do I work with on this team? And usually you can even ask them too during the interview. I've always asked them like, who exactly do I work with? Because sometimes the way that my team is structured is actually similar to consulting, where everyone in my team isn't actually working on the same client. We're all doing the same role within a project or an engagement, but for the most part, we're working with cross-functional teams within the company. So I'm not necessarily working with another ASA. I'm working with me particularly, but other people that are working with this client. And this could be like an account manager, an account executive, an engagement manager, maybe different other people like customer support engineers. There's just so many different roles out there, and you kind of have to understand what's going on, because this helps you figure out who to talk to with what they know. Because if you want to just talk about X, Y, and Z and they don't even understand what is going on, you have to understand their lens. Like if they come from a sales background, most likely they won't understand technical stuff, so don't even bother. Or you could just ask them straight up like, hey, how much experience do you have in this area? And just have an idea first before you go in. Because if you just keep on going on this call and then you are starting to overstep boundaries, you might be like, oh, now all of a sudden I'm talking to a client and I overpromise something that basically this other role is supposed to do. You don't want to do that. So the best thing to do is really understanding all the roles that you personally work with, as well as with this client or in general, so you don't overstep those boundaries and you understand what they need to know and what they like to know. So next time you go build a whole entire paragraph or email, they understand what they're saying. Vice versa. You want to know like how high up or how busy they are, because I've actually noticed with some people on my team, basically people I work with, but not exactly on my team, are like how much work they have are shorter my emails, and I put them in charts, as opposed to like here's a big email, or that like here I'm messaging them on chat. I probably don't have the luxury to message them on chat if they're someone executive, because they don't have the time for that. But if you're in person, it could be good to talk about it a little bit, because maybe they're chill that way. But it really depends on the focus of their focus too, because maybe your focus right now is like a fire in this particular client, but maybe for them, their focus is on completely something different. So you don't want to force it down. You want to make sure you know what they're looking at, what they're looking for, so you can communicate in a way that works for both of you. I think also like learning and poking around systems is good, within reason, of course. Like you don't want to just kind of like accidentally press something, but just learning and doing things, because a lot of times people kind of expect you to just walk you through or teach you and everything. Sometimes it's just good to just scroll and see like what are the options out there. So next time someone mentions this tool, you're like, oh, this sounds familiar, and then you kind of know where to go. And also the way I like to do things is like I try to form a map in my head of like, these kind of things I go to this software, these kind of things I go to this platform. So having an idea like that can be a good way to be able to attack something like a problem, instead of just like asking each time like, oh, I have this problem, I don't know where to start. You can first start like bookmarking. I always bookmark in every single company, bookmark all of the softwares and tools you've noticed most people say or use. And then that way you can find it instead of like searching in an email or asking like, hey, what was that software you used that other time? Just bookmark it or take notes or in general. But I bookmark everything. I put everything in folders. Emails too. I keep every freaking email that I get. I put them in folders of like IT, HR, training, and then I also have things like team and then manager, and then I also have like for clients, I have each folder for each of the clients. It's good to do that way so you can stay organized. Never delete an email, but also please organize your inbox, keep it to 0. I mean, maybe not keep it to 0, like otherwise you might set harsh expectations on yourself and you're gonna feel overwhelmed when you see all these emails and you're like, oh, I gotta keep it to 0. But I actually use my inbox as more of like a to-do list. If I see it's like an unimportant email, I just kind of move it directly without reading it. But sometimes I do, if I have time, of course, I'll read it and then I'll figure it out, then I move it away. And I reply for every single one that I want to reply to. If I'm not ready to reply, or if I'm still doing whatever that ask is in that email or whatever prompt it is, I keep it in the inbox so I know that's like a to-do list. It's like basically I build a to-do list out of my email inbox. But yeah, that's pretty much it, is like touch base calls, one-on-ones, learn and absorb everything you do. Do everything too. If you see events that are out there, or you see activities, do it, because you can really get an exposure and meet new people, which leads to another one is like make friends. And I feel like a lot of people I know, they nowadays have like said it's harder to make friends when it's virtual, but if you have the opportunity to go in person, do it. Of course, like if it's safe for you, if you can do it. I would try, like even if your commute's like 2 hours long, try to go in once a week, maybe once a month, show your face, okay? So that way people know who you are and that like you exist. And then after that, learn and poke around systems. Do not be afraid to ask questions. Go to the office, ask the shadow, essentially all the other questions. But I just wanted to bring this up because like specifically for me, what I found the most difficult was finding out a whole new web of systems and networks and people to work with, because at a consulting firm it's completely different. Even though the role is very similar, the entire organization is very different. How you attack things, how you access certain things, even how you do certain things, like creating a calendar invite. I had to learn how to do that, which is not that hard. It's Google Calendar, but like the part about booking rooms, I was like, oh, this is different, because I never had to book a room at Accenture. I just was a remote. But yeah, like let me know down below if you have any questions or tips. These were just basically the things that I focused on. It's essentially the same as like starting a new job, but what I found hard was like if you're completely changing to a whole different business or company. If I went from like Accenture to Deloitte, I feel like there wouldn't be that much of a difference, to be honest. But if you're going to a completely different industry, a completely different structure of a company, even going from like a private company to a public, or small to big, or big to small, many big differences. A lot of people do things differently. And the only way that I feel like is the biggest tip I have is just absorb everything you have and go to the office. Because I feel like showing your face is really nice to just say like, hey, like this is so-and-so, and then you kind of set up a personal brand for yourself. But also a lot of times communication could be easy. If I'm sitting at a desk and I see my coworker over there is available and I have a question, I go over there, or I just like literally talk to that person and say, hey, I'm having issues with this. What do you think about that? I get an answer, as opposed to like pinging and waiting and then they have to get in calls. And I know technically it's the same thing because they also could be on a call, but having that face to face, they could like show your screen. It's so easy. It doesn't have to be like adding something on the calendar or making sure that they're not like running off to do their laundry. I personally like doing things in the office because your onboarding could be really quick and approachable. That's the difference. Is like it could be equally as easy, but it's not as approachable. All right, thank you so much and see you guys next time. Bye.